What's up, everybody? Tori McElhaney here with Will McFadden. We're on Radio Row at the 2025 NFL Scouting Combine here in Indianapolis. And Will, it has been a exceptionally busy day so far, and we're only on day one.
I've learned so much today hearing from Terry Fon and Raheem Morris, talking to our exceptional guests who you guys are about to hear from. But yeah, Tori, I'm pumped to talk football.
Yeah, speaking of special guests, we have Nicole Auerbach of NBC Sports. We have Albert Breer, Cam Wolfe stopping by. So let's get into those conversations, you guys. All right, Nicole, I'm super excited to talk to you specifically because I feel like you're coming at this combine from a lens that's very different than some of the people that we're talking about. You have been fully ingrained in the college football landscape more than honestly probably anybody we're going to talk to all this week. So I kind of wanted to set the stage a little bit for Falcons fans. When you look at this draft class, particularly some of the guys that are going to be at the top of this class, what stands out to you about what college football's best is offering in 2025?
Yeah, well, it's so interesting because I'm looking at these guys regardless of team needs, right? So I'm just like, where are the guys that I liked watching the most? And it's so reflective to me of a really interesting Heisman Trophy race. Mm-hmm. It felt very up in the air at the end between Travis Hunter and Ashton Jeanty. They're both so special. Yeah. Like, I would reach for a running back for Ashton Jeanty because I think, like what you guys know, Bijan Robinson was that guy too, where you're like, okay, yeah, like the running backs that are difference makers are different than everybody else. It was worth having Saquon Barkley. It was worth having Derrick Henry, right? Yeah. Josh Jacobs.
It's also more fun. Just on a purely from a Sunday enjoyment standpoint, having Bijan Robinson has made my life better.
Agreed. Yeah. Yes, I agree. And so Ashton Jeanty, that guy, I'm super excited for that, and I hope a team uses him the way that I want to see him on Sundays. Yeah. And then Travis Hunter, who I did vote for to win the Heisman, I was fascinated. He comes into the combine as a defensive guy. I think that's the right call. I think it's easier to be a full-time defensive player and to figure out, he's great in man coverage. You can't just pop that in, but you could add a package that allows him to be a receiver. He could be involved in the red zone or something, again, depends on what the team wants out of him. He wants to play both ways, but it's easier to do it as a full-time defensive player than the opposite, I think. Will a team let him do that, right? It's still a draft, it's still a one-way decision. What if they're just like, nope, actually, you're not a receiver anymore.
Sorry.
So, that stuff is really interesting to me because, of what we got to see them do in college, and for him in particular, the amount of snaps he was doing, and to be full-time both positions. I'm fascinated to see how all of this goes. Yeah. And then Abdul Carter, he's a dude. I'm excited to see that. I'm glad he's getting so much respect and possibly could be the number one pick because he is that special. And it always jumped out at you when you were watching Penn State games that he was the best player on the field. Right. So it's fun to get to see those types of players that really did help tell the story of the college football season now getting this type of attention and credit. I do understand that the macro narrative is, right, it's a little bit more of a meat and potatoes draft, which I think is true. A lot of good offensive linemen who, I guess the big question with a bunch of them are are they going to stay as tackles or do they become guards?
Isn't that always the big question?
What's their wingspan, right?
Exactly.
You take somebody with 48 starts in the SEC at a left tackle, and then they're he's got to play center at the next level or he's never going to make it. I'm like, really? Is that what he has to do?
That has been crazy. Also feels like there's a ton of good edge guys, and obviously that's of interest to Falcons fans. I love that. This is one of my other takeaways from this week already is thank God they labeled that position edge because you used to have to, these guys would be listed as defensive line or linebackers. You're this isn't really what they do.
I know.
So I love that as well, and I think there's a lot of great players there. There's a lot of great defensive players in general in this draft. I love the D tackles from Michigan. They were game wreckers as well. Yeah. So there's just a lot of really intriguing prospects. But yes, it may not be it's not a quarterback heavy draft. I also think that the wide receiver isn't really as interesting as it's been in years past.
Yeah, and with wide receivers, it's one of those things where it's a deep class of wide receivers, but you're not really getting
first-round guys.
Yeah, you're not getting that kind
There's no Marvin Harrison Jr. There's no Malik Neighbors.
No.
There's no
Drake London.
And Rome Odunze. Those
Jalen Waddle, even those guys.
Those guys were so obvious,
first-round talent. Yeah.
And like Tedorone McMillan's great.
Yeah.
He is awesome. If Travis Hunter was a receiver, I also think he'd be in the mix.
Right.
But it's just not the same. So I feel like without like the sexiness of like a bunch of quarterbacks and a bunch of star receivers and like there's just walking highlight reels, it feels different.
Yeah.
And it feels also like the first couple of picks could go in a lot of different ways, which I also feel even by the combine usually you're like, all right, everyone knows it's going to be Caleb Williams and then Jaden Daniel, whatever.
Yeah.
Like you start the draft with 4.
Right.
Now I think like it'll be interesting to see who actually goes 1.
Right.
So last year, I mean, we saw 14 offensive players go before the Colts
That was
take
crazy.
Latu at 15. I mean, do you feel like it seems this year's draft is defense oriented? Like, do you feel we could see 12 defensive players go off the board before the Falcons are at 15? Like, how do you weigh all that?
Again, I also feel like there's a scarcity mindset.
Yeah.
So like, you know, if someone does need a receiver, first off, I think the 2 tight ends are phenomenal, like Tyler Warren and
Great
Colson
point.
Loveland.
Yep.
So like, I'm really excited about both of their careers as pros. So I do think like other positions would be very interesting. I mean, I think Ashton Genty is going to go, I would hope goes, you know, maybe in that 10 to 15 range or above. So I think that there will be the offensive players that are the special ones. They're just not necessarily like receivers or, I mean, McMillan might still go that high too.
Right.
But like last year, the run of quarterbacks was crazy too.
Yep.
And you
Yeah.
could just feel that everyone's like, oh my God, wait, what if I don't get one of these guys? Like, I got to get him now. And maybe someone feels that way about Jackson Dart. Maybe they feel that, like, he's a clear QB3, and they're worried that if they don't get him at the end of the first round, like, he won't be there.
Yeah.
And then you're stuck with guys that you have a lot more questions about. So I think that it's possible with that. I also think that, like, again, the edge, the corners, like there's enough really talented defensive players that, like, I'm sure if the Falcons keep their pick, they'll have options there. But yes, it does feel like overall the story of the first round will be the defensive guys, and like those are the guys that, you know, I think can impact these teams like in year 1.
Yeah.
Who are some guys, particularly when you're talking about maybe some edge rushers? We'll just talk about edge rushers for a second. Knowing that the Falcons pick at number 15, I keep saying that's prime real estate for probably one of the best in the class. When you evaluate this group of edge rushers, who sticks out to you and about who could maybe be there at number 15?
Yeah, I feel like those are 2 different questions, right? Because like some of the guys, like Jalen Carter or like Shamar Stewart, like they could go higher, right? And you're not sure they'll still be available. So I feel like Mike Green and James Pierce are the guys that I'm getting mocked to the Falcons a lot.
Yeah.
Michael Williams I've seen, which I love the idea of the Georgia guys. I mean, I'm saying this
right?
to Tori.
Great thing to say.
Everyone,
Yeah.
I know, everyone, that is something that I get asked pretty much weekly.
Well, first of all, I love the idea of drafting a Georgia guy for the Falcons and like immediately bringing in all of the like very familiar fan base to it. But also like these guys, we just saw the Eagles win the Super Bowl with a bunch
Georgia
with
guys.
The
Georgia's
proof is in the
deep-
pudding.
Literally like Georgia's 2022 defense, right?
Literally,
Like,
yeah.
So I like that idea. I don't know who's going to be available,
Of course,
but I like the idea of if one of the Georgia defensive guys is still there, taking him just because yes, like Kirby Smart is clearly doing the right thing to prepare these guys for the pros. But yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of guys that are going to probably test really, really well at the combine.
Yeah.
There's a bunch of like freakish athletic guys that are playing these positions or can move around, but there's a lot of great pass rushers. So I feel like they'll be well positioned if they stay at 15 to land one of them. But I'm just saying, like, if I were in the mix, I would definitely be looking at these Georgia guys if they're available.
Yeah.
You know, you mentioned Shamar Stewart, and I think the Georgia guys also fall in this category of like production versus traits. Where do you fall on that specific side of the
like stat line is so wild to me
compared to like when you see him and you're like, this is the mountain out there on the football
the
field?
way that people talk, the way that people talk about it, they're like, oh my God, can't miss, and then it's like 1.5 sacks every year.
And you're like,
Right.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean the pressures he gets, and it's so interesting too, and that's what like I'm really interested in coming out of the combine once these teams are meeting with these guys. And then that information eventually trickles out to us of like, well, okay, so what are they talking about the scheme, the way they were used, in different players? Like I'm going to be talking to Kyle Kennard tomorrow, and like I'm very interested. His production went way up in his 1 year at South Carolina.
Right.
And one of the things that I'm very interested in talking to him about is how he tweaked that, right? From going from good to great, but also to like finishing sacks. So is that like, is that on the front end of the play? Is that also on the back end? Like what do you do to actually like turn plays that could have been sacks, which South Carolina said when they got him in as a transfer, they were like, oh, we think he should have more sacks. Okay, so how do you actually do that? Right. So with some of these, I'm fascinated to hear some of these players explain why the stat line looks a certain way. But I also think for defensive players, it never really tells the picture. You don't have as many metrics and as many data points. You get good stuff now from PFF, and there's definitely more measurables than there used to be in game of impact, but it's still really hard to show the impact of a defensive player, especially if they're not getting sacks, right? So you're just oh, you watch him and you're like, yeah, no, he jumps out. Yeah. But that stuff is going to be very, very interesting. And I also feel like you also, in this process, you have different teams that talk themselves into potential or raw. Yeah. They're like, oh, we know we can get them there.
Yeah, and then we'll coach him up. Yeah.
Yes,
and
versus well, here is your full body work because they started a lot or they had a lot of snaps in college and maybe it's closer to their ceiling. That's always an interesting question.
I'm curious, this is not something that I thought to ask until you're talking about this, but I was curious your opinion on when the Falcons took Michael Penix at number 8 overall.
Well, first of all, so Tori is in a group chat with all of us, and everyone was like, oh my God, Tori's life just got fascinating.
No, it did.
I love Michael Penix Jr. So I love him so much. I was so excited that he got drafted so high, but then was so worried because you're like, are we going to see him for a few years?
Right.
You didn't know. You didn't know.
Yeah.
And just felt like he was going to be put in an awkward position to answer questions about that.
Right.
But oh my gosh, I love Michael Penix Jr. He was the last player I interviewed before COVID, before the world shut down.
Wow.
I was at Indiana football.
Oh, wow.
I was just doing a little spring tour.
Yeah.
And I talked to him that last day. And then everyone went home for spring break and never came back. And then obviously
and then the world shut down.
And the world
Washington.
ends. Yep.
But no, so that's what I'm so interested in with quarterback evaluation. Yeah. Remember how everyone was like, he's so old?
Yes.
Well,
they were like, he's so old and he's so injured.
Yeah,
that was always the...
He hadn't been injured in a while.
Right.
Until you get to my age. Then you know what old and injured feels like.
Yeah. Then you're like, all right, well...
You're like, I'm old and injured.
He's old,
ancient.
Yeah. But, I hope, and it seems like veteran college quarterbacks are now what you want because you're throwing them in to the fire really soon. If you're using a pick that high on a quarterback, people are going to want to see them pretty soon. And there are certain guys you can't. They're too raw. They're not ready. Yep. And he was so experienced and had such a great command of Washington's offense. Threw the most beautiful deep ball that I've seen in years.
Did it for multiple years,
and had seen it all, right? Yeah. And you so I was like, oh, I think he's gonna be great in the NFL, and I hate those arguments of he's old or he used to get injured.
Yeah.
And I only worry with quarterbacks is that they get put in a situation where either the offensive line is so weak and they get beat up a lot when they first get into the actually playing. I live in Chicago. I've seen the Bears do this. It's but. That stuff always worries me, but I was so excited about him. Mm-hmm. Loved him as a person as well. Thought he'd be a great face of an organization. But I do think that's kind of, I'm hoping that people are learning that the veteran experienced quarterbacks, and you have them. Cam Ward has been through so many different levels of college football. Shadur has taken a lot of hits because of the offensive line he was behind and also some of his decisions. But these are experienced guys.
Right.
Jackson Dart as well. All of these guys, Tyler Shuck, they've been multiple places. They've learned. They've seen it all. And I'm excited to see the way that the NFL evaluates them, knowing that with these younger quarterbacks, people are not patient. And it might be better to have someone that, a Will Howard, who no one's talking about, right? And he'll be, a later quarterback taken. Well, what did he learn? He learned a lot.
Yes, he did.
Forgot we were on a podcast for a second. He learned a lot in his year at Ohio State and developed differently as a quarterback and the way that he was making reads and decisions. So I just want the NFL to reflect what we've seen from some of these veteran quarterbacks, especially we're kind of at the tail end of the COVID extra eligibility, where they were we're getting 6-7 year guys.
Yeah. It's crazy.
But I just think that seems to be so valuable, and the upside of the experience is so much more valuable to me than oh, they're already at X age, and therefore the clock starts.
Mm-hmm. Especially with quarterbacks.
At least with quarterbacks. Yeah, we just saw Tom Brady playing to his 40s.
Right.
What are we doing?
Yeah. Everything's changed so much. So we don't want to keep you too much longer, but we do have some rapid-fire questions that we're going to give to basically everybody who stops by.
Okay.
So first question, if you are the Falcons at number 15, who are you taking?
I feel like I'm going to go with the Mocs right now with Mike Green.
Love it.
Yeah, I like his story and the skill set. I mean, I just, those are the kinds of players that, like, I feel like the draft, like, this whole process is for.
Yeah, they uncover those guys.
Yes.
Yeah.
They're
Not
no
many
longer...
Marshall Thundering Herd fans out there who are just turning on the.
Maybe they're watching right now. And they're
My
like,
dad
hey,
is
man.
my dad is one, so I feel like I'm allowed to say that.
It's like when you find a band before they become big.
Yeah, there you go.
He's my guy.
No better
100%.
feeling in the world than being like, yep.
Okay, second question. The Falcons, and it's important to add this context. The Falcons do have the number 15 overall pick, but they only have 5 picks in this year's draft. Would you stick at 15, or are you in the mindset of maybe pick up some more in day 2?
I think I stick because of the needs and the wants. If you want these types of defensive guys, there are a lot of them, but like they are going to run out.
Yeah.
And I think like first and second round, there's a ton of them, but I don't know how long some of these good edge guys, or if you're going a little further back end of the defense, I don't know. It's definitely got a lot of those guys, but you don't want to miss out if everybody else boosts their defense.
Especially if you have positions of need that you need to fill with impact players immediately.
That are right
like
there.
And I just feel like the scare, like as soon as some of these guys start coming off the board, people are going to freak out and start going up to try to get some of them if they love them.
The run's going to happen. Do you have a favorite player in this draft, maybe amongst the names that we're not talking about?
So I'm going to say position group. I'm going to say the running backs, because I'm very interested to see, we were talking about this earlier, if like there is an adjustment after seeing what the special backs did in the NFL this year. Are people going to talk themselves into Omari and Hampton, Caleb Johnson, like some of these guys that maybe like, I think everyone's going to fall in love with Ashton Genty. He is great personality, like my image of the season with him. Outside of like when he would just kind of stand like full stand like in the backfield, was so intimidating. He just like wouldn't like crouch down, like it was just standing tall. Was that like when they went for the Heisman in New York and they went and did a whole day of New York sightseeing, he was like head to toe Boise State gear. He was like in bright orange, and everyone else was just wearing normal clothes. And I'm like, he loves Boise so much.
He does.
And he was repping it, getting all the publicity for it, and this was after he had an opportunity to go do an NIL deal and go play a power conference program, and he didn't. So people are going to, if they don't already love Ashton Genty, they're going to fall in love with him. Does that end up pulling up some of the other running backs? Do people realize, like, hey, maybe we do want a guy that, especially the younger ones, that we think can be that type of special player for us, that can either maybe open up the pass game, because maybe we feel better about that. Maybe there isn't, a receiver that we love, or the tight ends are gone, and so maybe we're going to invest in the run game. I'm interested to see if that ends up happening. Like, I think Omari and Hampton is someone that is going to rise. And was really special. But again, how many people were like actively seeking out North Carolina games, especially when they're struggling and things are trending in the downward direction at the end of Mac Brown's tenure. So that's where I'm interested in positional value, because like that stuff drives me crazy when people are like, oh, they're like interchangeable, or like don't pay the running backs. I'm like, no, like they're special talents, and obviously Falcons fans are aware of 100%. Theirs. So I'm interested to see like how that goes from the draft. And Caleb Johnson was also terrific at Iowa. Again, it's like, that there's just certain programs where like they do certain things, so you kind of take it for granted. But he was really, really special as well, and he would have been the Doak Walker winner if Ashton Genty didn't exist. So I'm just interested to see how that position is valued in this draft.
Yeah, fascinating stuff. Thank you so much for sitting down with us. I very much enjoyed this conversation.
Yeah, anytime, guys.
Okay, first things first, we really need to talk and set the stage about this draft class overall. So as you're looking at, I guess, college football's best and who's coming up and who could potentially be candidates in this first round, what do you kind of think about this group?
So, like, I don't think it's a great year to have a top 10 pick. I don't think it's going to be a great draft from an entertainment perspective. I love the draft. Like, make that clear. Like, the worst drafts are super entertaining to me.
Yeah.
But as far as like the casual fan, somebody who's wondering who they're going to put on their fantasy team in the fall, like, it's not that draft.
Right.
I think really you have two elite players. The more people I talk to, the more that's sort of solidified. It's Abdul Carter, the pass rusher from Penn State, Travis Hunter, of course, the Heisman winner from Colorado. And then taking the quarterbacks out of it, like almost like this clump of players that are in that, like in the same sort of area and maybe just below blue chip, and that's Will Campbell, the LSU offensive tackle who might be a guard. It's Mason Graham, the Michigan defensive tackle, who's short and has short arms. It's Tet McMillan, who's 6'5", but there are some questions when you dig into him a little bit. So, like, there are good players, and if you have a high pick, you got a chance to get a guy who's going to be a really good player for you, but it's not what you normally see at that level of the draft. And so I think that's something that teams have to sort of wrap their heads around, and the teams that are drafting like 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, they may be drafting for need. You know what I mean? Which you don't want to be doing that early. But that's sort of what the draft is, this draft is, I think. So, and then you get out of the first round, and now all of a sudden it's like, okay, like there are starters in the second and third round, and there's some depth here. And so it's a good draft to have picks, I'd say, 20 to 100. Like if you're in there, like you can wind up doing good business.
Yeah.
It's interesting, you mentioned kind of the players who maybe have that elite type of something, but like they also have those questions. When you look at the edge rushers, right, and that's what we expect the Atlanta Falcons to be doing a lot of homework on, it almost feels like it's a little bit of the reverse. You get a Shamar Stewart who is like physically checks all the boxes and is really impressive, but the production isn't there. And you look at some of the Georgia guys, like same thing, where they've got maybe elite traits, but the production isn't there. So how do you view this edge rush class?
Oh, so there's not like a Myles Garrett.
Right.
There's not a Jadeveon Clowney. There's not like the, prototype, like looks like he was built in a lab edge rusher. Abdul Carter's great. He's a little different than that. But like there's a position where there's a lot of depth. I think the defensive line in general, if you're looking to like emulate what Philly built, there's opportunity to do that this year. Because you can go down the list of the guys, and you can get into the second and third round, and you might be able to still find players there. So like that's sort of the give and take, is like you don't have like the prototype, like looks like he's supposed to look, plays like he's supposed to play. You don't have that, but you've got, like you said, Shamar Stewart, James Pierce, like you have guys like deep into the first round who have a chance to be really good players, and that continues into the second round, both with the D tackles and the edge guys.
So if you're the Falcons, and this was going to be one of my later questions in our rapid fire that we're doing at the end, but I'm just going to go ahead and ask it. If you're the Falcons at number 15 overall, and you're kind of talking picks 20 to 100, and the Falcons have only 5 total draft picks in their entire class with a lot of needs, specifically defensively, is that something, if you're Terry Fontenot, you're on the phone with
trading
people?
Down. Trying to trade down, and maybe replacing the third round pick, or trying to replace the third round pick you lost.
Yep.
From in the Matthew Judon trade, could you drop down 10 spots and pick up a 3? Like that's something you'd be looking at. Then the question becomes, well, what is somebody coming up for?
Exactly.
And like that, and if you are at a point in the draft where it is really flat and teams are saying there's not a big difference, well then you need like a run on a position. You know what I mean? Like say the first group of edge rushers are coming off the board. Now, do you want to take one?
Yeah.
Like, or is it worth it to trade down and have some team come up and flip you a day 2 pick? Like, I certainly think something like that would be in play for the Falcons. Like if they can find a way to recoup the pick they lost there in that trade, again, like based on the makeup of the class, I think that'd be something you'd be looking to do. Now, again, it's going to boil down to there being something there for somebody to come up and get.
Right.
Yeah, it's easier said than done, right? And I love kind of the way it's so easy just to sit here and say, well, of course, you just move down, you get some more picks, but like the reality of that situation is much harder.
Right.
And the positions it feels like there could be a run on, to your point, maybe the Falcons want to be in that run.
Right.
Maybe they want to be part of that mix. So maybe pivoting away from the draft and looking at the current iteration of the Falcons. Obviously, here at the Combine, a lot of the conversation is centering around Kirk Cousins, what the Falcons might do. Michael Penix, the 3 starts he had, looked great, checked a lot of boxes.
Yeah.
He is the starter moving forward. So how do you make sense of what the Falcons may do here?
Well, history tells me he's not going to be on the team. It's just, again, I know what Terry said, at the podium, and but it's really hard to find a situation like this one where you've turned the keys over to a first-round quarterback who's young, who's still on a rookie contract, and you have the guy he replaced on your roster the year after. There just aren't examples of it. And so I think, over the next couple of weeks, they're going to be working to try to trade him. I do think like one thing you potentially could do is try to buy a draft pick and say, all right, like we're going to trade Kirk. We're going to pay down a certain amount of his contract, and we're going to ship him off to Cleveland. Say like, he's $27.5 million. We'll pay down $10 million of that if you flip us a 3, and then you get and you get Kirk. You could get creative like that. I don't know if they'd have any takers on an idea like that, but you could get creative that way. And if you don't have a taker, then I think that's where the rubber hits the road, and now you got to make a decision on what you want to do. And I'm a proponent for creating the best environment you can for your young quarterback, and I think it's just it'd be a little funky to have Kirk Cousins just there. You know what I mean? Like,
hanging out, yeah.
And when he doesn't want to be there, and I'm not saying Kirk would cause a problem, but there's a natural awkwardness to that. Right. And I do think, like in an ideal world, you want to clear the decks and have it be Michael Penix's team. So when you get out there in OTAs, there's no question. Right. It's his team, and you're going forward with him as the quarterback. You want to prevent a situation where, if he throws a bunch of picks in a preseason game, it's like, well, maybe we should just flip back. You want to avoid those sorts of things. So, yeah, my guess would be Kirk is somewhere else next year.
What do you think the market would be like for Kirk Cousins as you're kind of talking with people? And I know there are some quarterback hungry teams across the league, but when it comes to what he is and what he does, is there interest there?
I think it comes down to like how desperate another team is, and like how. And look, I think they need some dominoes to fall first.
Right.
What's happening with Matthew Stafford? If Matthew Stafford isn't available, where are the Giants looking? Where are the Steelers looking? Do you get to a point where there just aren't very many starting quarterback options out there? Mm-hmm. What happens with Sam Darnold, And, the tricky thing about it for the Falcons is that you have that trigger in his contract where the $10 million guarantees for 2026 in the middle of March.
Yep.
So if he's not going to be on the team, you don't want to wait too long and have, that guarantee vest. So I think you sort of sit on him, and you hope that some of these other situations play out in a way that creates some sort of desperate bidder that's going to come in and give you something for him. And that's not to say he can't play.
Right.
But I just don't think anybody's trading for him at $27.5 million.
Right.
Especially when they know the Falcons might be put in a position where they're going to have to cut him.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So I think that part of it is, it's a difficult situation
it's tough.
to be.
Right.
And I look, I wouldn't rule out either, maybe they wind up over the next few weeks doing what the Rams did with Stafford and give him permission. Hey, we know you want to go start somewhere. Let's put it on you, and let's see if there's a suitor out there who's willing to pick up some of this contract and make it a little easier on us.
Could you see a situation, you mentioned, kind of like the desperation of other teams, where you pay that $10 million to move it down the line into training camp, closer to the start of the season where injuries happen? Maybe a team does become a little bit more desperate at the quarterback situation, and all of a sudden, we got Kirk Cousins for you. Let's
yeah, I mean, that's the whole Sam Bradford solution, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where the Eagles got really lucky.
Yeah.
And you hate to say luck because it was an awful injury that happened to Teddy Bridgewater that created that, but it was this unbelievable circumstance that came up that generated a bidder who was willing to give up a first-round pick to bring in Sam Bradford, and they felt good about where Carson Wentz was, so everything sort of aligned.
Mm-hmm.
It's difficult to count on that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That's the thing is it's an easy thing to say somebody's going to have an injury. Yeah. You could wind up just left holding the bag.
Right.
So I don't think that can be your plan. I think if you're going to do that, it has to be you have to sit down and you have to level with him and you have to say, look, if something comes available, we're very open to trade. We're very open to trading you, but we're going to hold on to you right now, and you have to have him on board with it.
Right.
And Kirk's a pretty good guy,
mm-hmm.
but I think he does want to go play somewhere. And so it'll be interesting to see the way all that plays out.
Something else I'm interested in knowing your opinion about, you can talk all day long about the first round picks of the Atlanta Falcons over the last 4 years, Bijan, Drake, Mike. Kyle Pitts is somebody who I think is a big question mark for a lot of people. When we're talking about market value and we're talking about what a team could do with someone like Kyle Pitts, what do you kind of see as a future for him as a former number 4 overall pick, but maybe someone who didn't live up to expectations?
Yeah, I mean, I think you just have to have a plan for him. Like, I don't think he's going to fit into an offense in a conventional way. And look, last year, I mean, for most of the year, he wasn't the best tight end on the team. You know what I mean? And that was just the hard, cold reality of the situation. There wasn't really much more to it than that. A new staff came in that didn't make the investment in him, and wasn't the team that pulled the trigger on that draft pick. And so, he was in a position where he truly had to compete, and he didn't win the job resoundingly enough to have that sort of opportunity where they were going to generate something for him. And that's the thing that people miss sometimes too, is with some of these guys where it's like you have to have a plan for them. A lot of people will say, well, that's just coaching. Come up with a plan. Well, the guy has to be good enough the guy has to be a good enough player for you to be willing to accommodate somebody in that way, right?
Yep.
Like if we're talking about Jahmyr Gibbs, for example, right? The Lions accommodate because he's awesome.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
The ball in his hands a lot.
They accommodate him.
I covered his recruiting out of Dalton High School in Georgia, so he's always been that guy.
The Chiefs make accommodations for Travis Kelce.
Yeah.
He's a Hall of Famer. So I say you have to have a plan for him. But he also has to be effective enough to make it worth going outside the structure of what you already do to create that plan for him. You can't just have like 5 skill players out there with different plans for all. It doesn't work. You know what I mean? So I think that's a huge part of it with a player like him that's unique and different is you have to have a plan for him. He has to be good enough to warrant that plan. And we'll see if he can find a place that'll do that for him.
Somebody on kind of like the other end of the spectrum is Grady Jarrett. And if you're looking at he has been here in Atlanta as a mainstay for the last decade, is a huge member of the community, fan favorite, big part of the team in the locker room, but he's going to be 32 this year. Last year, 2.5 sacks, only 18 pressures. So as they're looking at maybe getting under the cap, and if you look at what his cap hit would be versus the savings that you could accrue, it's fair to say how you go about kind of creating some of that space for yourself. Where do you see Grady Jarrett as a player at this point in time, and how do you weigh personally the value a player brings to a franchise in the locker room, in the community, versus what they're bringing on the field?
I mean, I think it's important to have guys like that, and I think Grady Jarrett's obviously had a huge impact over there in tying eras together, and I think a player's institutional knowledge of a place can be valuable too. I think he plays a position where those guys, if you start to pace them and you use them a little bit differently, they can play forever. Big guys generally last, and whether it's offensive line or defensive line, if a guy's a good enough player, and Grady is, you can find a role for him. To me, I think for the Falcons, then it would be coming up with, all right, here's our plan, and him being on board with it, and this is how we're going to pay you now because of this is what your role is. You're starting to get to that point in his career, and I think a lot of times when you have the relationship he has with the organization, those things can be worked out.
Well, we don't want to keep you too much longer, but we do have some rapid fire questions for you. So first things first, if you are the Falcons on the clock at number 15 in the 2025 NFL draft, what are you doing?
I'm trading down, but it might not be, and there might not be the opportunity to do it. I do think the lack of numbers in their draft picks, think that they probably would like to add some more capital. If I'm at 15, I'm probably looking at the edge rush class. I think that's a good situation for the Falcons because the strength of the class matches up with your need. And my guess would be that's probably Shamar Stewart, James Pierce territory, right? So the guys you're getting there aren't perfect. James Pierce is a little undersized. Shamar Stewart's production, like you said, doesn't match up with his physical tools. So you're going to have to project a little bit with whoever you take there. But like that feels like the right place for somebody like one of those guys.
Last question, and then we'll let you go. When you look at this draft class overall, do you have a guy that you are really high on? A guy that you're really looking forward to seeing what he does in the league?
I mean, like Mason Graham from Michigan made my November 30th really miserable. So I think he's going to be a really good player in the pros. I think he's a really clean, a really clean evaluation for scouts is what I've gotten back from teams. Like, you have an idea of a really solid idea of what he's going to be. He's not a guy who's going to be the star here. You know what I mean? Like, he's got shorter arms, but he is a game wrecker on the interior. And I just think of like some of these guys that are middle of the fairway picks, right? Like, great example of it a couple of years ago was Trent McDuffie. Like, Trent McDuffie was a middle of the fairway pick, and the Chiefs knew it. Like, you know, even if you don't get an all-pro, you're getting a really good player. The character is off the charts. He does all the right things. He's technically sound. He's consistently gotten better in his time as a collegiate. He's coming from a good program. So Trent was like, yeah, we know what we're getting. You know, Barton from Duke, the center from Duke, Graham Barton, who went to the Bucks last year. He was another one of those, like middle of the fairway. I know what I'm getting. And I sort of think like Mason Graham would be like maybe that guy for this class. I got to do more digging, but like he'd be one. You know, I'll bring up one of my Ohio State guys, Travion Henderson. I think that a lot of people are going to watch him and think that they can make him Jahmyr Gibbs. And I think Gibbs' success in Detroit is really going to help Henderson. He's a mother bleeper of a pass blocker too, tough as nails, really good character-wise. So he's one. He's another one. I'm just trying to think. I want to come up with another good name for you guys. This is like the opposite of rapid fire.
No, it's all good. This is actually what rapid fire has turned into.
Yeah.
It's just like we're all just chit-chatting.
What can you tell me about Max Hairston from
So
Kentucky?
I've heard he's going to be a star here. Like, I've heard he's going to run and jump and like off the charts.
Yeah.
And so he's one that I think is really interesting. There's a few really athletic corners. Like, God, the name's escaping me. The Iowa State corner.
Yeah.
The name's escaping me, and I'm learning. I'm
Tall,
gonna get there. I'm
Mm-hmm.
gonna get there. But he's one
Porter, right?
I was talking to some of the Senior Bowl people, and he hit 22 miles an hour during practices at the Senior Bowl on the GPS, which I think it was. There had only been 5 guys over the last 7 years who hit that speed,
Wow.
and 4 of them ran 4.35 or faster in Indy, and the only 2 that ran faster, that had a faster time on the GPS than this guy, were ran in the 4.2s.
Oh my
So-
gosh.
Okay.
And like,
So speed at the
of
corner
course, I
position.
forget his name. But yeah, like the Iowa State corner is another one of those. Like, I do think that there are the corner spots interesting, and then I think you got a bunch of guys like that where there's potential, like, to go find really good players.
I like Trey Amos. I haven't heard his name a ton. Yeah, it's a really deep, it feels like, corner class.
Yeah. So I think that there's like, I think that there's like there's a bunch of guys who are going to athletically test really well, and I think have a real chance.
Awesome.
Well, thank you so much for
No
sitting
problem.
down with us. We really appreciate it.
Absolutely got
Albert
it.
Breer.
All right, Cam, I just want to get your initial thoughts of the draft class overall, particularly the guys that you're looking at in the first round, and who the Falcons could really be looking at number 15 overall. Where are you kind of sitting right now?
Yeah, I think first of all, the draft from a national perspective will hit on the 2 quarterbacks, Cam Ward and Shedeur Sanders, and then Travis Hunter.
Yeah.
Everybody's talking about what position he's going to play. Heard the Titans say earlier today that they think he's a corner. They're the number 1 overall pick. The Browns at number 2 said they think he's a receiver, and so it's good
fun.
to be Travis Hunter, where you got
Right.
teams that look at you in either way. So
Yeah.
to me, those are the things nationally. I think for the Falcons, I got a chance to talk to Raheem Morris earlier.
Right.
He talked about pass rush. Like, it feels like 4 or 5 years in a row we've all said, hey, this is going to be the year the Falcons draft a pass rush. If I had to handicap it right now, I feel like this is the year the Falcons draft a pass rush. Yes.
As someone who has mocked a edge rusher to the Falcons for 4 years in a row, and I just keep doing it over and over, I'm like, surely one of them will hit.
Yes.
Like at some point.
Yeah, just the odds,
Right.
the odds, the chances of life, right? This is a really good pass rush class. Like, so it's interesting because although we may mock a pass rush, this could be a year they decide to wait and say, hey, we can get a starter in the second round and third round. And so it's a good year to need a pass rusher, good defensive lineman as well. And so I definitely think this will be a defense-focused offseason for them. They obviously have spent the last few years upgrading their weapons with Bijan and Drake London and Kyle Pitts, and now you have your quarterback in Michael Penix, and so now it's time to get that defense. And so regardless of whether it's pass rush in first round or not, I think you're going to see them in free agency and in the draft go heavy defense and rebuilding this unit up and try to take down Tampa.
You mentioned kind of like rounds 2, rounds 3. The Falcons only have 5 draft picks. They've got first round and then second round and none in the third, none in the fifth. Like, so when we look at this draft and you look at edge rusher, you look at corner, things like that, it feels like the real meat of the value of those positions is kind of that day 2 range.
Yep.
So if you're Atlanta, are you considering, hey, do we trade back? Do we maybe try to accumulate more picks in that range? Or do we stick at 15 and get one of these maybe like top tier guys who individually could come in and be a difference maker?
Yeah, talking to people here in Indy, this sounds like a draft that's a little bit less heavy at the top, more strong in the middle. And so this doesn't feel like the year we're going to make a big trade-up splash. If anything, it's what you're saying, that you're going to trade back. I was talking to someone last night, and their thought was, hey, picks 20 to 50 may be the same caliber of player. And so if you're at that spot, then maybe you're sitting back and you say, hey, whether it's at 15 or whether it's our second round pick, we trade back and get multiple in that group rather than having one outside of it. And so I think they're in a good spot. Like, Atlanta doesn't need a star player in my mind. I just think you need 2-3 really solid front 7 players to complete that group, and I think they'd be in good shape.
I'm curious from your perspective, and having spoken to Raheem Morris earlier today, what was the point of your conversation with him? What were you trying to get out of him, and what was the main thing that you took out of that conversation?
Yeah, 2 things. One, like, obviously a big topic this week is Kirk Cousins and what to do with him. I'm sure he's had countless questions there, but to me, more interesting for the Falcons' future is, like, what's next for Michael Penix, right? Like, I think we're talking so much about the backup, you forget about the starter, right? And I remember covering that Week 18 game, and I know it was a loss, but seeing Michael Penix elevate to a level that I don't think we even saw him, even the Falcons that saw him, using his legs and ability that we hadn't seen in college. And I think that poise is something to get excited about. And so I really wanted to get from him, like, what's next? What is things that you are working on him with, or things that you see in him that maybe we haven't seen yet? And I thought he was really engaging about just, some of the behind-the-scenes elements and some of the ways he's already connecting with teammates that you don't always see a rookie do in that level. And with more prep, remember he was thrown in, as a starter with 3 games left in the season. So you get more prep, you start to see the hints of the elements that we saw, you start to see those consistency. And that was really the thing he's saying there. He said we started to see a level of consistency that we maybe didn't even anticipate at that part. So now we're even pumped about what's next. So I really wanted to hear more about Michael Penix. And then, obviously Kirk, that'll be something they figure out in the next couple of weeks. And if not, then he'll be a backup and he'll be here for a while. We're at a little bit of a stare down, and that's life. Like, Raheem made a comparison in our talk. He said there's awkward situations all through like NFL locker rooms. Quarterback is just the one that gets the publicity. And so it's not unusual for a coach to have to deal with a quote-unquote awkward situation, or a team to. And the reality is they've set up their roster now with a quarterback on a rookie contract that, the Kirk contract is not going to doom them from being able to do what they need to do in free agency or in the draft. So those were 2 key elements there. And then I really just wanted to get an idea of what he viewed as the next step for this team. He talked about the 6-3 start and finish. How he finished is a big key for them. They said they really felt like they needed in the pass rush department, but also, just knowing what you're chasing. And he was very transparent. He said, we got to go beat Baker. He said, "That's it. We got to go beat Baker. That's our goal." And sometimes you got to talk about it to see it realization. A lot of times teams just say, hey, we were focusing on ourselves. We're focusing on ourselves. And I'm sure they are, but you've got a team that's been at the top of your division for a while. You've got to figure out what do we need to do to overcome this one hurdle that's preventing us from our goal.
Yeah, I mean, I do think you have to almost kind of manifest and make it clear to everybody, hey, here's the goal, here's the team, that we're chasing or that we view ourselves in competition with.
Right.
But I totally agree with you. It's been really interesting to me to hear how the Falcons and Terry Fontenot have, and they've used the term baked in when they're looking at kind of the contract figures for that quarterback room. And it seems like that's something that's happened around the league. And I'm curious if you've noticed other teams taking a similar approach to what is the most important position in sports.
Right.
Is it really about the individual dollar figures for individuals, or is it more just, hey, as long as we get quarterback right, it's okay to throw some money at multiple players at the position?
Yeah, I think one thing that a lot of people at home maybe don't think about is the cap situation rises tremendously every year. Like we're almost at $300 million for the cap. And so what may have been a huge, debilitating number previously may not be for here. And so there's a lot of talk about the $10 million roster bonus that Kirk has. Well, $10 million 10 years ago might have been, debilitating. Here it's not a huge hindrance for them. Baked in is a good word. They're going to have to pay that money regardless. So it does not force their hand. To your point about the quarterback room, I think that you can look at it as a conglomerate and say we're paying the quarterback room $45 million instead of the thought of, hey, it's only $5 million for your starter and $40 million for your backup. I think that you're looking at a situation where there's teams all around the league that are paying $50, $60 million for their quarterback. Of course, you want the cheap backup to manifest it, but for 1 year, I don't think it's anything different than what Tampa's having to do with Baker. The Saints are having to do with Derek Carr in that situation, and then eventually the Panthers will have to do with Bryce Young.
I'm curious from your perspective, and nationally, I think everybody always talks about kind of the big three of Bijan Robinson, Drake London, and Kyle Pitts, and kind of the different views of where they are in their careers.
Right.
Where do you kind of land on the Kyle Pitts of it all when you're looking at the type of asset he could be, but also what his future could hold for a player of his caliber that maybe hasn't lived up to the expectation that you use a number 4 overall draft pick for?
Yeah, I'll just keep it real. I think you have to change expectations, right? Like the reality is I think everybody looks at it at the lens of Kyle Pitts was a top 5 pick. Kyle Pitts was top 5 pick. Yes, he was, but this was a long time ago, right?
Yeah.
And at some point, draft status can't be the one thing you hold on to. I think that he still can be a really good player in the league. He may never live up to a top 5 expectations, but that doesn't mean he can't be good in his own new expectations. And I think that's something that you'll see this year, whether he's here or not. I think you're going to see him be a little bit more relaxed because sometimes that pressure becomes debilitating on your own self.
Right.
Yeah,
You're always
great point.
thinking, I got to chase this. I got to chase the idea that I'm the best tight end in the league because that's what I was drafted to be. I got to chase that rookie year when I had 1,000 yards, and that has to, whether I get it or not, it defines my success. No, you can have a good year where you're catching, 60 balls for 800 yards and 6 touchdowns. And I think that type of recalibration is something that, knowing Kyle a little bit, I think that's going to be a focus point for him this year. And I think for Falcons fans, for people at home, we have to get out of the idea of this guy's got to be looked through the frame of he's a top 5 pick.
All right. Well, I definitely don't want to keep you too long. We know you got a lot of things to do, but we have 3 rapid-fire questions.
Okay, let's do it.
You ready? All right. If you're Terry Fontenot in this Falcons team at number 15, what are you doing?
I am taking the best pass rusher available. I really believe that is the key to unlocking this defense. We saw last year, the end of the season, the pass rush really came home with a lot of veteran guys on 1-year deals.
Yeah.
Imagine if you have that homegrown guy. So draft pass rusher there.
Right.
Are you looking to stick and pick at 15, or given what we talked about with that 20 to 50 range, do you want to accumulate and maybe trade back and get some more picks?
Yeah, I love to trade back. 5 picks is not enough for me. I'm a big believer in that you have as many shots at the pie as possible. I think people overestimate sometimes their ability to hit the home run pick, especially if you're not picking in the top 5. So I'd trade back.
All right, last question, we'll let you go. When you look at who could potentially go in the first round, who's your first round sleeper pick, a player that you are really excited to see what they could do in the league?
That's a really good question. Let's go. There's a tight end out of LSU named Mason Taylor.
Okay.
Really good player. I don't know if he's a fit for Atlanta because they have a tight end, but I think Mason Taylor, son of Jason Taylor, actually, played really good ball at LSU. I think that talking to some scouts, he's got some comps to Travis Kelce. He's a really big player. He's not the new age tight end that runs a 4.4, but he can do it all. To me, I think he's going to be a guy that sneaks to the first round, and I think he's going to be a day one starter and a really good tight end in this league. So
love it. Well, thank you so much for sitting down with us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. Appreciate y'all.
Thanks, Kim.
Absolutely.